This family heard their missing daughter's voice on the phone, 12 years after she vanished, and they have no idea what truly called them. In the next 30 minutes, I will reveal 3 things. First, the impossible truth behind Emily Carter's disappearance. Second, the chilling secret the police buried for a decade. And third, the terrifying reality of who was on the other end of that line. But first, look at this. A faint whisper, barely audible, captured on a forgotten answering machine. Mommy, please, help me. The story begins in the sleepy town of Havenwood, a place where doors were left unlocked and children played freely until dusk. That idyllic image shattered on a warm summer evening in 2005. Emily Carter, just 8 years old, was playing in her backyard, a stone's throw from her bedroom window. Her mother, Sarah, called her in for dinner, but Emily never responded. The backyard gate, usually secured, was found slightly ajar. The first frantic search turned into a desperate plea, then a town-wide manhunt, and finally, a cold case that haunted every resident. The police, overwhelmed, quickly concluded she had run away or been abducted by a stranger, dismissing crucial details that would later redefine the entire narrative. Years crawled by, each one heavier than the last for the Carter family. Her room remained untouched, a shrine to a life abruptly interrupted. Birthdays passed without cake or laughter, Christmases without her bright smile. The hope that once burned fiercely dwindled to a flickering ember, kept alive only by a mother's stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar car, ignited a fleeting spark, only to extinguish it with the crushing weight of reality. The town whispered theories, some mundane, others chillingly supernatural, but none brought Emily back. Then, on a Tuesday morning in 2017, exactly 12 years to the day she vanished, the impossible happened. The landline phone in the Carter home, a relic rarely used in the age of cell phones, rang. Sarah, startled, answered. What followed was a moment frozen in time, a voice from the past, clear as day, yet utterly out of place. It was Emily. Her daughter's voice, older, strained, but undeniably hers. The call lasted only seconds, riddled with static and a desperate plea before disconnecting. The initial shock gave way to a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, terror, and a desperate surge of hope that had been dormant for so long. The police were called again, but their response was immediate skepticism. A prank, they said, a cruel joke. But Sarah knew. A mother knows her child's voice, even after 12 years of silence. This wasn't a prank, it was a ghost reaching out, a chilling echo from a place no one could comprehend. The call itself became the new horrifying mystery, unraveling everything they thought they knew about Emily's disappearance. The initial police investigation into Emily's disappearance was a textbook case of tunnel vision. A series of assumptions that led them down a path of dead ends, missing the critical first mistake everyone makes when a child vanishes, focusing solely on external threats. They scoured the woods, interviewed neighbors, and put out Amber Alerts. But they failed to deeply examine the internal dynamics of the immediate environment, particularly a subtle tension within the Carter household that would later become a glaring red flag. That detail, dismissed as irrelevant grief, actually held the key. The local police, under pressure to find a quick solution, dismissed any suggestion of internal conflict. They saw a grieving family and nothing more. However, a pattern of strained interactions had been observed by a few close friends in the weeks leading up to Emily's disappearance, specifically between Emily and her older brother Daniel. Daniel, then a moody teenager, had been increasingly withdrawn and irritable, a typical adolescent phase, according to his parents. But there were arguments, hushed and intense, about Emily's perceived invasiveness into his privacy. One specific incident, recounted by a neighbor months after Emily vanished, involved Daniel yelling at Emily for always being in his stuff, followed by Emily running away in tears only to be found by her mother hiding in a shed. This was brushed off as sibling rivalry, a minor squabble in an otherwise loving home. Yet this aggressive reaction from Daniel, disproportionate to the perceived offense, was a crucial piece of the puzzle that was never properly investigated. The police were looking for a stranger, not an internal tremor. The missing gate latch, initially attributed to Emily's carelessness or a potential abductor, was also overlooked. Daniel had been seen fixing it clumsily just days before, after a previous argument where Emily had supposedly let his pet hamster escape. Was it truly fixed, or was it intentionally left weakened, a subtle act of rebellion or negligence that had unforeseen consequences? The police report simply noted the gate was ajar, not broken or forced, implying a casual exit rather than a violent abduction, yet no one questioned the why of its state. This focus on the obvious, the external stranger, blinded them to the unsettling undercurrents within the family home. The possibility that Emily might have run from something, even temporarily, rather than to someone, was never seriously considered. The emotional landscape of the Carter home, the unspoken tensions, and Daniel's increasingly erratic behavior were all relegated to background noise, irrelevant details in the face of a seemingly clear-cut abduction. This oversight would haunt them for years, laying the groundwork for the impossible call. The first mistake everyone made wasn't just overlooking Daniel's behavior. It was the failure to connect it to a series of escalating incidents, a pattern that hinted at Emily's growing distress. The police were trained to look for physical evidence, not the emotional breadcrumbs left behind by a child. What I'm about to show you now only 1% knows, because it was a detail buried deep within a forgotten box, a secret that would unravel the family's carefully constructed narrative of a perfect home and set the stage for a new, horrifying possibility. Months after Emily's disappearance, Sarah, in a desperate attempt to feel closer to her daughter, began sifting through Emily's belongings. Tucked away, in a secret compartment of a worn-out teddy bear, she found a small, glittery diary. It was rudimentary, filled with drawings and simple sentences, but its contents painted a disturbing picture. Emily wasn't just playing. She was documenting her fears, her anxieties, and, most strikingly, her increasing discomfort with Daniel's presence. The diary entries, though childlike, spoke volumes. One page showed a drawing of a monster with Daniel's distinct spiky hair, captioned, "Daniel is mean. He says, I'm a baby." Another entry, dated just a week before she vanished, read, "Daniel said if I tell, he will make me disappear." This was a direct threat, chilling in its context, yet dismissed by Sarah at the time as childish exaggeration, a fantasy of a vivid imagination. The police never saw this diary. It was too painful for Sarah to share, a private confession she couldn't bear to expose. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a clear escalation of a power dynamic, a young girl feeling genuinely threatened by her older brother. The diary revealed a pattern of intimidation, of Daniel using fear to control Emily, to keep her from telling. What exactly was she not supposed to tell? The entries were vague, hinting at minor transgressions, but the underlying tone of fear was undeniable. This wasn't the image of a happy, playful child that the family presented to the world. It was a girl living with a quiet dread. The revelation of the diary completely recontextualized Daniel's earlier behavior and the strained interactions. It suggested that Emily's disappearance might not have been a random act of violence from an outside force, but rather a desperate flight from a situation within her own home. The missing aspect of her case suddenly twisted into something far more complex and heartbreaking. The call, 12 years later, now carried an even heavier weight of unspoken truths and unresolved trauma. The detail nobody noticed, the one that changes everything, wasn't just the diary but how it connected to the very nature of that phone call. The police, blinded by their initial assumptions, never considered the source of the fear that drove Emily away. This next revelation is what separates those who understand true horror from those who simply scratch the surface. It's not just a phone call. It's a terrifying echo of a past trauma, delivered with a precision that defies logic. When Sarah first reported the call, the police analyzed the number. It was untraceable, a ghost number that appeared to originate from a defunct landline exchange, one that hadn't been active in Havenwood for over a decade. They dismissed it as a sophisticated prank, a voice recording manipulated to sound like Emily. But Sarah insisted on the nuances, the subtle inflections, the way Emily always pronounced mommy with a slight lisp, details no prankster could replicate perfectly. The chilling part was the content of the message itself. Mommy, please, help me. It was a direct plea, but the tone wasn't of immediate danger. It was more like a long-held anguish, a desperate cry from someone trapped in a prolonged, agonizing situation. The static wasn't just interference. It was a thick, almost viscous sound, like a barrier between worlds. It was the sound of a connection fighting against immense distance, not just geographical, but something far more profound. The police tried to dismiss the call as a recording of Emily from before her disappearance, perhaps found and manipulated. But the voice was distinctly older, albeit still childlike, a girl on the cusp of adolescence, not the 8-year-old who vanished. This was the voice of Emily Carter at 20 years old, 12 years after she vanished, trapped in a timeless plea. This wasn't a trick of technology. It was a paradox, a voice traveling across time itself, carrying a weight of suffering that was almost palpable. This impossible call shattered the notion of a simple abduction or runaway case. It introduced an element of the supernatural, a violation of the natural order that defied all logical explanation. If Emily was alive, where had she been for 12 years? And if she was calling from somewhere, how could that place be untraceable, existing outside the normal network? The phone call wasn't just a communication, it was a bridge, a fleeting connection to a dimension of fear and mystery that the Carter family was just beginning to grasp. The truth behind the phone call wasn't just about Emily. It was about the deafening silence from her brother, Daniel. While the family was gripped by the impossible call, Daniel remained strangely detached, almost unnerved by the renewed attention on his sister's case. It was a reaction that screamed louder than any confession, a detail that the police once again failed to scrutinize, but which a new, independent investigator would soon uncover. This isn't just a mystery. It's a chilling psychological portrait of denial and complicity. As the news of the phone call spread, the media descended on Havenwood once more. Sarah and her husband John were desperate, clinging to any shred of hope. Daniel, however, retreated further into himself. He avoided interviews, refused to discuss Emily, and grew visibly agitated whenever the topic arose. His parents attributed it to old grief, to the pain of reliving the trauma. But his eyes held a different kind of fear, a shadow of guilt that Sarah, in her clouded state, couldn't decipher. A retired detective, Arthur Jenkins, captivated by the case's impossible twists, began his own investigation. He reviewed the original files, spoke to old neighbors, and most importantly, spent hours observing Daniel. Jenkins noticed Daniel's peculiar habit of nervously clenching his jaw whenever Emily's name was mentioned, a subtle tic that spoke volumes. He also noted Daniel's almost obsessive avoidance of the old backyard, the very place Emily had disappeared from. Jenkins discovered a crucial detail. Daniel had a history of compulsive lying, often fabricating elaborate stories to avoid consequences, even minor ones. This wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was a deeply ingrained pattern. Could this pattern extend to Emily's disappearance? Could his mean behavior, documented in Emily's diary, have escalated into something far more sinister than sibling squabbles, something he had successfully hidden for 12 years? The truth behind Emily's disappearance began to shift from an external threat to an internal one, centered around Daniel. The phone call, with its desperate plea for help, now seemed to be a cry against something known to Emily, something she had tried to escape. The silence of Daniel wasn't just a symptom of grief. It was a carefully constructed wall, designed to keep a terrible secret buried. If you're finding this unraveling mystery as captivating as I am, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It truly helps us bring more untold stories like Emily's to light. The truth behind Emily's disappearance wasn't a sudden abduction by a stranger, nor was it a simple runaway case. It was a slow burn, a tragic confluence of neglect, fear, and a desperate act of a child. What the experts, the police, were hiding wasn't a conspiracy, but rather their own incompetence and their unwillingness to admit that a child could vanish without a clear, external culprit. The real story was far more mundane, yet infinitely more heartbreaking than any sensational theory. Jenkins, the retired detective, finally confronted Daniel, not with accusations but with empathy. He spoke of Emily's diary, of her fears, and of the weight of carrying a secret. Daniel, now an adult burdened by years of unspoken guilt, finally cracked. He confessed, not to murder or abduction, but to a childish prank gone horribly wrong, a prank that spiraled into an unthinkable tragedy. On that summer evening in 2005, Daniel and Emily had been arguing fiercely. Emily, tired of Daniel's bullying, threatened to tell their parents about a secret stash of stolen candy he kept. Enraged, Daniel dared her to run away, telling her to disappear, and that he would make sure no one ever found her, if she told. Emily, terrified but defiant, took him at his word. She climbed over the loosely latched backyard fence, believing she could hide in the old abandoned shed in the nearby woods, just for a few hours, to scare Daniel. Daniel, thinking she would return quickly, went inside. He never imagined she would actually vanish. Panic set in when she didn't come back for dinner. He searched frantically, calling her name into the darkening woods, but found nothing. Afraid of confessing his role in her flight, terrified of his parents' wrath and the legal consequences, he stayed silent. He let the narrative of abduction take hold, a lie that grew larger and more monstrous with each passing year. Emily, however, never reached the shed. Disoriented in the fading light, she stumbled into an unmarked, abandoned well, hidden beneath overgrown foliage just beyond the property line. It was a tragic accident, a terrible consequence of a childish dare and a moment of fear. Daniel's confession, though relieving in its explanation of her disappearance, introduced an even darker layer to the mystery of the phone call. If Emily had died that night, who was calling 12 years later? What the experts were hiding wasn't just their initial failure to connect the dots. It was the chilling reality that some mysteries transcend logical explanation, a truth they were ill-equipped to handle. Daniel's confession explained Emily's fate, but it deepened the enigma of the phone call. The police and even Jenkins initially tried to rationalize the call, but the evidence pointed to something far more unsettling. This is where the case veers into the truly inexplicable, into a realm where the dead refuse to stay silent. After Daniel's confession, a search team was dispatched to the area around the abandoned well. What they found confirmed his story in the most heartbreaking way. Emily Carter's remains were recovered from the bottom of the well, along with fragments of her clothing and a small waterlogged locket she always wore. The official cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning, consistent with a fall. The case of the missing girl was finally closed, yet the phone call remained an open wound. The police, eager to put the entire ordeal behind them, offered a new theory for the phone call. A sophisticated, highly elaborate prank, orchestrated by a sick individual who knew the details of the case. They pointed to the untraceable number and the advanced voice manipulation required. But this explanation felt hollow. Who would go to such lengths for 12 years to torment a grieving family? And how could they replicate Emily's voice with such uncanny accuracy, including her unique lisp as an adult? Jenkins, however, refused to dismiss the call so easily. He had the audio analyzed by independent experts. Their findings were baffling. The voice was Emily's, aged by 12 years. showing slight vocal cord changes consistent with natural maturation. The static, too, was peculiar. Not digital interference, but a complex, almost organic distortion, unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't a recording, it was a live, albeit impossible, transmission. What the experts were hiding, perhaps, even from themselves, was the terrifying implication. The call was real. It was Emily, calling from beyond the grave, from a place where time and space held no meaning. Her desperate plea for help wasn't from the moment of her death, but from an eternal state of suffering, a chilling echo trapped in a loop of torment. The phone call wasn't a clue to her whereabouts. It was a window into her impossible afterlife. The secret technique that allowed Emily's voice to pierce through 12 years of silence wasn't a technological marvel, but a terrifying phenomenon known only in whispers and ancient folklore: temporal resonance. This is not just a ghost story. It's an exploration into the fabric of reality itself, where intense emotional energy can leave an imprint, a ripple that can manifest across time. The police and scientists dismiss it, but the evidence, if one dares to look, is overwhelmingly chilling. Jenkins, haunted by the inexplicable nature of the call, delved into parapsychology and theoretical physics, searching for answers beyond conventional forensics. He discovered research into residual hauntings, where traumatic events leave an energetic residue that can replay under certain conditions. But Emily's call wasn't a replay. It was interactive, a plea for help directed specifically at her mother. This suggested something far more potent, an intelligent haunting, a consciousness reaching out. He found obscure theories on temporal displacement through emotional anchors. The idea is that extreme emotional trauma, particularly at the moment of death, can create a strong enough energy signature to momentarily bridge gaps in time and space. Emily's last moments trapped in a dark well, alone and terrified, could have generated an immense, concentrated wave of fear and desperation, powerful enough to resonate across 12 years. The landline phone itself, a direct wired connection to the outside world, acted as a conduit. Unlike cellular signals, which are dispersed and ephemeral, the landline created a more stable, albeit fragile, pathway for this temporal resonance. It was like a forgotten antenna, perfectly tuned to pick up the faint, distant signal of a soul in distress. The static wasn't just noise. It was the sound of reality bending, of two timelines momentarily colliding. This secret technique wasn't something Emily consciously employed. It was a desperate, primal scream for help, a last vestige of her consciousness, clinging to the living world. The call wasn't a means of communication in the traditional sense. It was a raw, unfiltered burst of pure, unadulterated terror, a desperate attempt to break free from an eternal loop of her final moments. It was the universe itself, vibrating with her agony, trying to deliver a message no one was prepared to hear. The secret technique wasn't just temporal resonance. It was amplified by the unique circumstances of the well itself, a place that acted as a focal point, a natural amplifier for the residual energy of Emily's final moments. This isn't just a theory. It's a chilling convergence of geological anomaly and intense human suffering, creating a gateway that few ever experience, and even fewer survive. The final plot twist is not just about who called, but what facilitated the call. Jenkins' research led him to geological surveys of Havenwood. He discovered that the area around the abandoned well sat atop a unique convergence of quartz deposits and subterranean water flows. Throughout history, such locations have been linked to paranormal activity, believed to amplify psychic energy and act as natural conduits between dimensions. The well, a dark enclosed space, would have further concentrated this energy, trapping and intensifying Emily's final moments. The very act of drowning, a slow, agonizing death, would have flooded Emily's system with adrenaline and terror, creating an immense surge of bioelectrical energy. This energy, combined with the natural amplifying properties of the well and the surrounding geology, created a powerful, localized field of emotional residue. It was a perfect storm of circumstances, a unique anomaly that allowed her consciousness, or at least an echo of it, to persist and attempt to break through. The phone call wasn't a one-off event. It was the culmination of 12 years of this residual energy building, pulsating, desperately trying to find an outlet. Each year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the energy would peak, culminating in that single agonizingly brief transmission. It was a cry that finally found its way, not through conventional means, but by literally forcing a breach in the fabric of reality, using the forgotten landline as its anchor. This understanding of temporal resonance and geological amplification reveals that the call wasn't just a random event. It was a desperate, intelligent echo, a soul trapped in a loop of its final moments, using the only available means to reach out for help. The voice on the other end wasn't just a memory. It was a fragment of Emily, still suffering, still pleading, forever bound to the terror of her last breath. The chilling reality is that her call wasn't a sign of hope, but a confirmation of eternal despair. The final plot twist isn't just about Emily's suffering or the impossible call. It's about the true nature of her plea. Her words, "Mommy, please, help me," weren't a request for rescue from the well. They were a warning. A desperate, timeless warning meant not for her past self, but for her mother, for the living, about a cyclical horror that extends far beyond one tragic accident. This changes everything you thought you knew about the phone call, and it reveals a terrifying truth about Havenwood itself. Jenkins, deeply disturbed by his findings, continued to investigate the history of the well. Local archives revealed a pattern of disappearances and strange accidents in the same vicinity, stretching back decades, even centuries. Children, pets, and even adults had vanished near the well, often without a trace, only for their remains to be found years later, or never at all. The common thread? Intense emotional distress preceding their disappearance. The well wasn't just a place of accidental death, it was a drain, a nexus of suffering. It fed on fear, on the despair of those who met their end within its dark confines. Emily's call wasn't just her voice. It was the collective echo of all those trapped souls, their torment intertwined with hers, amplified by the well's sinister properties. Her plea for help wasn't personal. It was a universal cry against the consuming darkness of the well itself. The true horror is that Emily's call wasn't asking her mother to save her from the well, but to save others from its clutches. Help me meant help us. A desperate warning to seal the well, to stop its insidious hunger. Her voice, traversing time, was a final act of selflessness, a desperate attempt to break the cycle of tragedy that plagued Havenwood for generations, a cycle that the police, in their ignorance, had allowed to continue. The main loop resolves here. The missing girl was found, but the call was never about her physical return. It was a spectral message from a place of eternal suffering, a warning to the living about a malevolent force lurking beneath their feet. The final plot twist is that the call was not a closure, but an opening to a greater, more ancient horror, a testament to the chilling truth that some voices, once silenced, refuse to stay quiet, especially when the very ground they lie beneath holds a dark, hungry secret.